Hello again. Welcome to Wine 101 on the road. Today we have a special treat. We're out in a vineyard in Clarkdale, Arizona. Behind me we have Mingus Mountain facing Jerome. To my left, down in the valley, we have Cottonwood, Arizona. And this is the Yavapai College campus where they're doing some remarkable things with enology. They have a two-year degree program. And I've got the director of viticulture with us today, Nikki Check. She's in charge of the young vineyards and in charge of all the students that are going to be learning how to grow grapevines here in Arizona. It's a really neat deal, and it's a pleasure to say hello and meet you again. She's also got another title. She wears a lot of hats. She's the mayor of Jerome. So without further ado, the Honorable Nikki Check to tell us about the vineyard and what they're doing here.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, so these vineyards actually were planted this May, and they've done a lot of growing over the season. Our previous plantings across the way there were planted in 2012 and 2013, so we're kind of staggering our plantings so that all students get a chance to know what it's like to install a vineyard in very rocky ground, as you might see. So it's a really wonderful hands-on experience that's coupled with our academic programs so that students really get a well-rounded education in both the vineyard side and the winery side.
That's great. That's great. So we have the first one of its kind in the Southwest, and this program teaches them many different facets, from starting vines to pruning to training and eventually to making wine, which is why we're all here. And so I wanted to talk to you first of all about the history of Arizona. A lot of people don't think we have any history as far as grape growing and winemaking, so could you tell us about that first?
Sure, yeah. Actually, funny little factoid is that Arizona and New Mexico in the 1700s grew more wine grapes than California did, because the history really comes from the missions establishing vineyards, and certainly there was a heavy presence of missions in the entire Southwest. So, of course, the quality wasn't great back then, but there were some substantial plantings in the Verde Valley in particular. There was the Sherman Vineyard in Sedona, which was a 75-acre vineyard that operated for 25 years before Prohibition. But Arizona was excited to get into Prohibition and not too excited to get out of it. So we went in early, and when Prohibition was ended, a lot of our policies didn't reflect that anything had changed. So in the late 70s, early 80s, it became legal to produce more than 200 gallons with a license, but you had to go through a distributor. And finally, in 2005, it became legal to direct market through a tasting room. And that really changed the game, particularly in the Verde Valley, because you know, with real estate prices and land space here, we really have to focus in towards more boutique production and definitely direct sales. So that was a game changer, and that's really why Yavapai College got into this program, because we realized this industry was about to grow really, really fast, and without an educational facility, you know, resource for the industry, it was going to be more difficult. So that's what we've been doing since 2009.
Sure. Well, you know, it's news to me when I hear all the winemakers that are starting to come here, and it's programs like this that are making that happen. It was hard to get someone that had dreams of being a great winemaker not to go to one of the more well-known places like California. So what they're doing here is really beginning to bring a lot of the young and creative winemakers here, or soon-to-be winemakers. So tell us about this vineyard we're standing in as far as total acreage and the different, how many you planted each year, and what your goals are, what your future outlook is.
So we've been planting about 3 acres every year, and it's really important for us to be experimenting with some varietals. You know, initially what growers might think of as a safe investment, growing something that they could sell easily, like Chardonnay or Cabernet, those may or may not be the best grapes for Arizona. So the college felt we really need to kind of get ahead of things and be planting things that look like they have great potential, but maybe haven't had a market developed for them yet. So we have been planting things like Tempranillo, Sangiovese, Viognier, Malvasia bianca. This is our Italian block, so we've got Barbera, Refosco, Aglianico, all kind of more occult, Italian reds, which will be really interesting to see how they come in. One of the biggest differences between Arizona as a growing region and say other places is our heat index. Of course, you know, people think of Arizona as being hot, and it certainly is. We also do have issues with cold, but the thing about heat is that it really affects the level of acidity in the grapes, which is totally essential to good winemaking practices. And so the varietals that we are honing in on are generally higher acidity varietals, which is a great opportunity for Arizona to be producing something unique in a wine market where people are beginning to want that unique product. Certainly. And search it out and head our direction because of it.
That's great. And when you decided that the college was already here, when you decided that this was a good place to put some grapes, what did you do as far as soil, as far as climate, and as we look, we're kind of facing north and eastward towards the Verde Valley. So what were your decisions in deciding this would be actually a good spot for grapes?
Well, because of the rocky nature, the first acre that we planted near our campus was so rocky that out of 1 acre, we were able to take those rocks and terrace half an acre of grapes on a hillside. So people weren't sure that it was possible. The install process is very difficult, but once you get the vines in the ground, they're actually thriving in a place where other agriculture is not going to do well. So that's really neat, first of all. The other thing is, Arizona has more European soils than you might guess. So we are not the fertile valleys of California, but rather we have some high mineral content soils. We're standing in a very mineral-rich clay right now that's weathered off of Mingus Mountain, which we all know is famous for mining. So all those micronutrients are here. That's really going to contribute to a high level of phenolic ripeness. So you're going to see really high character wines out of this plot. Across the wash there, we have a higher limestone content. So the soils in the Verde Valley kind of vary between clay and calcium. And so the calcium soils are going to impart more like a mineral quality that kind of feels a little bit basic on your tongue. So you might feel like a salty character. Really nice with whites and whatnot.
That's great. That's great. So now I am a young student. I'm looking to learn how to do this. What am I going to see in my program? I'm going to start, is there classroom work and field work? I mean, how does this break down and how does it all work?
So, you know, it's a 2-year program if you want to do viticulture and enology. We also have a 1-year viticulture program. And so the program, the certificate at least, consists of, you know, some basic horticultural classes like soil and water management, but then an intro to viticulture class and a more advanced class maintaining and then establishing a vinifera vineyard. And so those classes are designed to be paired up with a practicum class that you would enroll in, and during that semester where you're learning about the vineyard, you have 60 hours that you need to spend working in the field. So we have that every semester, so a student sees a full year, you know, 60 hours a semester, and really gets an understanding of what a season looks like and how people do things differently. We encourage them to go to other vineyards and see what they're doing other places. Sure.
In the community, if you've been to Camp Verde or the area since the wine boom of the last few years, you'll notice a resurgence of activity in the Old Town section and so forth. There's a lot more people that are involved in wine, and so I'm imagining that dialogue is opening up now where there's a lot of places you can go and get other opinions, and so starting to make Arizona a mecca for winemakers around the country to come here and learn how. So when I start, am I going to learn about planting? Am I going to learn about rootstock? You don't do the grafting here.
No, and that's because we're using patented varietals, you know, so we order them through a nursery. Okay. Rootstock is very specific to Arizona, so this is 1103P. It's a really great one, especially for a clay soil If you're on a chalkier soil, 140R is a really good one. So there's, that's very specific to Arizona or drier soils, which is definitely a part of the curriculum. We talk about varietals, we talk about rootstocks, we talk about soils, and a lot of it is talking about management and how to really drive your production towards really high quality production. Because you can kind of fumble along and get a mediocre crop no matter what you do, but there's so many nuances and timing issues and whatnot that go into a nice crop, and so that's really what we try to detail in the last courses.
So the rootstock actually, if it likes the soil, will provide the vine itself what it needs to do the job that you think would be best for this climate and location. They didn't always graft rootstocks.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit about how that all came about?
It's one of the reasons why France still has a little thing against the U.S. There's a little bug, a soil aphid called phylloxera, and it originates from the southeastern United States. And that actually is the reason why Thomas Jefferson's vineyard never worked out, which is a bummer. So anyhow, that bug made it to California and wiped out California. It also made it over to Europe and wiped out about 90% of all world grape production at that time.
This bug lives in the roots.
Yeah, and so it feeds on the roots, and then it does an aerial cycle where it lays eggs in the leaves. So you can see it on the leaves. So anyhow, the devastating time in, I think, 1870, and the way that they overcame it was looking to the origin of phylloxera, which was the southeastern United States, had a lot of native grapes. And so they took those grapes and they started breeding them, and they started grafting the European wine grape varietals onto these rootstocks so that they survive. And they've done trials where in Europe they'll plant own-rooted vines again, and indeed they die again. So that phylloxera is still there. These rootstocks are just resistant. We haven't had a huge problem with that in Arizona, but it is documented in the Prescott National Forest, and I've seen a little bit on the native vines in the washes and whatnot.
So you're putting a rootstock that's resistant to it so that the vine can be healthy, and then you're picking your varietals and they get grafted. And well, that's really cool. So now I'm going to come out here and have all these different varietals. Tell us about some of the varietals you got around here. You basically reached it, but point to us, show us which ones are what.
So the block behind us that's a little more established, you can see across the wash, that's made up of Tempranillo, Sangiovese, and Viognier. So the Spanish and Italian varietals seem to be, really hopeful. We're really excited about those. Viognier is just a really nice white that's a little bit tricky, so I wanted to do a mix of things that were going to be shoe-ins. We're a little bit of an experiment, but hopeful, and then ones that were tricky that farmers were going to need help with, So Viognier is one of the trickier ones, I would say. Malvasia bianca is going to be one of our shining stars. It's a really wonderful aromatic white that is just very special. I call it kind of a gateway wine for people who really like to drink sweet wine. Well, yeah. If they try a nice dry Malvasia,
it's very aromatic.
It's very fruity and aromatic and enjoyable, so it's a good gateway wine.
That's great. So this climate here, I'm standing on a slope. You can possibly see it, but this slowly goes down into the basin that is the river, the Verde River Valley. And this slope is a prime choice for what reasons? It looks like you get a little bit of protection from warm afternoons with the mountain here. Is there any other reasons that this is a really good site?
Right, so airflow is a big deal during the season. We've got good airflow, all summer long, but really the winter is key because even though Arizona has hot summers and we worry about that, our winters do get cold enough to see what we call winter kill. So that's in the months of December and January, usually only a couple nights a year, where the temperature drops below 10 degrees. And, when that happens, if it's a sinking cold and the air stays there, you have a chance of your vines dying back. And so that was something that the pioneers mostly experienced when they planted near Oak Creek and Page Springs, and a lot of hardship, they went through to figure out that where the water is in Arizona, even though it's a secure resource, it might not be the best place to plant because that is also where the cold air goes. Cold air moves just like water in a landscape. So, you know, if you imagine cold air coming from the mountain, it's going down those drainages just like water would. And so if that cold air moves through your landscape, that's a good thing. You might have a chance of spring frost, you know, snaking through and giving you a little bit of issue in the spring, but you're going to avoid those devastating winter kill moments. So this is a great place for that. It's in what we call the banana belt, so not so high that you get the frosty winds up on the mountain, not so low that you get the sinking colds.
Yeah, the middle of the slope. So now we look around and we're also in the middle of desert, what was high mountain desert prior to this, so water's got to be an issue. I mean, I want to know, what are you guys doing? I know you're into conservation. I know you're into trying to be as sustainable as possible. What are you doing as far as irrigation or water?
Well, our first planting in 2010 was really hopeful. It was in soil similar to this, so, you know, something that actually holds on to water. That's makes up a big a part of your water use is your soil composition. But besides that, we chose a very heat-tolerant, drought-tolerant variety, Negro Amaro, and that used 0.75 acre-feet in the first year, which the first year is kind of a lower water use, but it's very frequent. And that's really impressive when you look at other crops. Say another specialty crop, pecans, they use 6 acre-feet of water per year. So to get under 1, and you know, a general range, that was a very conservative year. So I'd say, you know, 1 to 2 is probably what you'd expect, but that can actually be less than domestic use. The average for what you see listed on the ADWR website for residential use is an average of about 3 acre-feet, you know, with so many houses per acre. So that has been a big political thing in Arizona, is, you know, trying to support things that use less water. And residential development has always been less than agriculture until we see this situation. And not only is it using less or equal to residential use, but it's also providing an amazing return per gallon on economic development.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But we've taken it a little bit further here and actually spent the money to connect into the city of Cottonwood's effluent. So we're now applying A++ effluent to all of our vineyards, and the wine center you'll see later has rain catchment tanks. So we really want to be a best practices organization to show, you know, how to be responsible with agriculture in the Southwest.
That's fantastic. So you've got all these vines. These students are going to come out. They're going to get to work the fields and learn how to do canopy management. They're going to be able to train these vines. And then they're going to be able to take this product and follow it through. And as we're going to see in another episode, they actually have on this campus a winery, a complete center that students can not only grow the grapes, but they can actually go from doing that to moving into making the wine, to doing the chemistry behind it, to also doing the bottling, and even doing some of the sales. So they have all kinds of different venues, or actually avenues, that students can use for their future if they want to be in marketing or if they want to be in winemaking or whatever. So it's a great thing and a good asset. If any of you have a chance to come out, they're very friendly here. They'd like you to come and see it. They also would like to have you come out to the wine center. I guess we're going to be doing an episode over there and talking to that department. But other than that, real quick, give us, there's a couple things I wanted to ask you. A little bit about your history here. How did you land the job of being the director of viticulture?
That's a funny story. So I'm from Prescott, which is very nearby. I studied agriculture, and because the wine industry seems to be a great catch-all of people looking for a second career, most people didn't have a degree in agriculture or winemaking. You know, they were coming from another profession and learning what they could, but maybe not going back to school. So I started as a temporary, you know, seasonal worker for Merck Vineyards, and I was the only person that they knew that had a degree in agriculture. So all of a sudden my degree became terribly important. I was one person who knew a lot about soil, so I landed in management. there fairly quickly and did that consistently while teaching as an adjunct at Yavapai College. And then finally the program had enough steam that a couple years ago they hired me full-time. So
well, that's fabulous.
It's been fun.
And as I mentioned earlier, she also in her spare time is the mayor of the town of Jerome. But I was going to ask you about as a public sector, a private sector, wanting to get involved in this and help, there's ways that you can actually be involved. And you have a thing that's called, is it Adopt a Vine?
Yeah, we do. We've got a couple great community outreach programs. The funnest thing to do is come actually plant vines. We have a couple hundred people show up. It's always the first Saturday in May. And a couple hundred people come up and we plant 2 acres in 1/2 day. It is really amazing to watch happen. And then you can take it a step further, and for $20 you can adopt the vine that you planted. And we'll get a little dog tag printed with your name on it and a little message, and you can come visit your grapevine.
Name your vine.
And there's also still a few slots on our Founders Wall, which is displayed at the Southwest Wine Center. So if you have an extra $5,000 you really want to give to the program, then your name can be there for everybody to see.
If you want a great gift, yeah, give somebody a grapevine. That's kind of neat.
Yeah, it does make a great Christmas present, actually.
So I'm looking here, we're standing here, obviously this is the rainy season here, and we've got a lot of little fissures and a little, the water is trying to make its own little chasms through the vineyard here. What are you learning about how to manage and how to move it around the vine or move it through the vine without doing too much destruction?
Well, so this is the first year that we're doing it. You can also see piles of rocks. These rocks are a resource for us, so we've got the big rocks already piled up somewhere else. We've raked up our small rocks and we're actually using that for drainage protection. So we're trying to use our own resources here to do a little work like that in the more vulnerable areas. But another thing is you also see a lot of weeds out here. Normally these would be mowed down if there weren't piles of rocks here, but keeping weeds, you know, controlled, mowed, but in the vineyard really does kind of help with erosion. So if you have a soil, this is actually pretty sturdy soil, but if you have a highly erosive vineyard, you're really not going to want to go with a totally clean, cultivated situation. Also, the weeds in the springtime, we noticed instead of harboring a lot of negative insects, we have a lot of beneficial insects. So we have tons of ladybugs come and lacewings, and even though it might look a little bit messy sometimes, it's a system that's really working well for us. We're really lucky not to have something like Bermuda grass. That is a weed that can really prevent the vines from developing well. So I guess we're just lucky to have that option. You know, sometimes you don't have that option.
Now these young vines right here that you just planted, when are they going to be actually showing fruit and able to be fruit, what I would say wine-worthy fruit?
Right, so the process is kind of a long one. It's 5 years to a full crop. And so essentially you just grow them the first year and then cut them back, and then the next year you develop a trunk and train that, and then the next year you develop cordons, and then the next year you develop spurs on your cordons. Depending on the vigor, you can start producing a crop, you know, responsibly in year 3. Some people, you know, will train a trunk and a cordon unilaterally in the second year and produce that early. It depends on your vigor and your capacity. We try to keep it, a lower input system as far as water and nutrients go. So we're on the slow grow method, and so it'll be probably the 4th year you'll see a pretty good harvest.
Okay, now are there any vines here in the vineyard that actually are ready to produce fruit, to be able to turn it into some delectable juice?
We cut a bunch of fruit off of our 2012 planting so that they could really establish their cordons. Because it's hard for the vine, they really give a lot of energy to the fruit once it's on there. So if you need to produce permanent wood material, which would be, the cordons are the arms. Yeah. So that's something that might last you for 50 years. You really want that wood to be nice and mature and developed, so we don't risk it in that year generally and cut the fruit off at that point. But that would have produced, and next year they'll definitely be producing. The Negro Amaro plot that was planted in 2012 or 2010 will have a full crop this year. And you're going to be making it here in the winery? That's actually because it was sponsored by Merkin Vineyards. That fruit goes to them.
Okay.
But we will be doing a public harvest here in the next couple weeks, so that will be really fun.
Oh, that'll be fun. Yeah, so if you have any questions about what they're doing here and about Nikki and how to maybe be involved, you can certainly get in touch with her through the college. She's the director of viticulture. There's Michael Pierce, who's the director of enology, which is the winemaking portion of this whole process. And so we're going to be going over to the winery and talking about that in our next episode. And so I would like you guys to do yourselves a favor. On your way over to try some wines in the Verde Valley, stop by here and see what they're doing. It's quite fantastic. I have two other questions actually. Where are you going to get fruit for these students this year?
Well, that's a good question. That's a big reason why we planted, was because fruit is hard to come by in Arizona right now. In fact, a lot of community colleges just have small plots of vines because they get donations from other places. So we're actually one of the only two-scale vineyard and winery operations happening at a college. But most immediately what we're doing is we're sourcing fruit from southern Arizona. So that's kind of the grape basket of Arizona. They produce a lot of fruit down there, which is wonderful that we can snag some of that and bring it up here for students to learn with.
Good. And the finished product is actually going to be available for you guys as the public to come and taste what these students have done. And so that's really remarkable. And there's one thing we're trying to do on this series is to talk to the people. And because you're surrounded with wine, when you're living wine and grapes all your days, we wanted to know what you think is your favorite. What do you think is the most promising wine out of here? And what would your food pairing be with that one?
Oh gosh, the most promising wine. Well, I'm just going to give you maybe a favorite of mine this season, because it's hard to pick an all-time favorite, I will say. But something really cool that Caduceus and Merkin Vineyards has been doing is growing Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is a red grape, but the clone they have planted doesn't color up very well. It's actually a blush clone. So they figured that out and started growing this wet red grape specifically for a Saunier or a blush production. Most blushes are really made by accident because a red doesn't color up and you don't know what else to do with it, so you just make the rosé wine. But this wine is really very aromatic, and you can tell there was a lot of care put into it. So it's a Nebbiolo rosé, and I really like it because it has enough character that on a summer day you can have one glass of wine, eat through all your fruit and cheese, it goes lovely with that, and then also eat it with a steak in the same night. So it's pretty cool.
That's great. Well, again, thank you for your time. We really appreciate your knowledge, your efforts, and we really think that the college here is going to help this valley recognize its potential for wine growing. So we're going to see you next episode, and we'll do the wine center where we're going to find out what they're planning to do to make some wine. And I just want to tell you guys we appreciate you viewing, and we'll see you down the road.